So, well, yeah, as Lorenzo said, I will talk about this project, which is called Seoull. That is the Korean word for towards Seoull, towards Seoul, or Seoul Street. So, well, I'll start from the site as usual. So, as you see, it's located in the very center of Seoul, where basically the initial city was like built. So, as you see here, so the site is the very center, and what will become the main station of the city. So over time, the project, well, yeah, the site evolved, and see also the complexity of the city followed. So yeah, this is a picture that like tells like a terrible stories after the war. So everything was like a kind of a tabula rasa. Which was something that we also experienced in Rotterdam after the Second World War. And from the 70s, you see that the Seoul Bridge is already there. It's already in place, so it's been used for vehicles. So, like, yeah, it was thought for cars. And was also like a place where people could make their sit-in and gather together, protesting or here celebrating like a democracy. So yeah, this is how it was when we started looking at it or make our investigation. So the bridge is here, as I was saying. This is the main train station. So we also have done a competition on this side. So for a new CBD, so this area will grow more in the future, and it will be the economic center of Seoul. So this is the very first image we have seen about the project. And we also have to confront with these kind of damages. And and this is something that we will dive into later when we will make like a comparison with another example that you might know better. So yeah, the whole Korea was quite a dangerous place for people, for pedestrians. So as you see, he has like quite 4 times more kind of incident than the US or other countries. And it was also quite polluted. So was like the worst, most polluted country in the world. So so this is the situation, and this is used to be like a big problem. So the car had an advantage over the pedestrians, which had to make like a long run to reach the other side of the train station. So the mayor and the president of Korea had like a great vision. So they wanted to turn like to make like a big shift, and so they wanted to turn all these pieces of infrastructure into more blue and green system. So this is a project they made. And as I was saying, this went like very popular, and this is the mayor of Seoul, then who became the president of Korea. This was the mayor when we inaugurated the project in Seoul, which was promulgating this idea of like turning the whole infrastructure, but the whole city into like a green park. So yeah, this is the logo. As you see, we really wanted to focus on the walkability of the intervention. As Lorenzo said yesterday, so the project was built during the 70s, as I was showing, and then was like inaugurated the refurbishment in the 70s. So we started from an international competition, and we like from the very beginning envisioned this intervention as a tree, as an organism that could grow over time and expand. So this is what we proposed in the very first place. So, and it's an arboretum. So we scatter along the whole surface like a series of trees and pods. So we have like in numbers we have of trees, shrubs, and flowers. So, and sorry, Yeah, so as I was saying, we thought of these as an organism that could grow and expand over time. So here you see the first intervention. So we wanted to expand and connect to the neighbors. So, and in the future, these can even be extended and more and more till we can like realize a dream and greenifying the whole city. So this was the actual situation when we started looking at it, and this is what we wanted to achieve, like a much more greener and healthy city. So yeah, here is what I was saying. So everybody knows the example on the left, and it was built while we were starting designing our own project. So we had to confront with this, and we had to sorry, I need to plug the. Okay. So and then we had to confront with also the structure. So as you see in the left, they have like a huge columns. They have like a very low kind of height, and they had like a great structure because it was thought for trains. So while in our design we had like a design for cars, and then it's all based on concrete and has like one single column. So and these had like a huge this was a huge problem for us to design what we wanted to design. So because with the structure we had, we made a calculation that we could have like a 10 centimeter of soil covering the whole surface. But these we didn't want to do because also it was a sort of the same of the New York example, and we instead wanted to reinvent the wheel. We wanted to create something new, something that was peculiar, something that was like for Seoul only. So what we've done was concentrating the soil in pots, so we were able to have like a much thicker like soil amount, and so we were able to plant trees, and yeah, like very high trees. So yeah, this is the detail of the highline, and this is our detail. So as you see, the amount of soil is like pretty much the same, but then it's concentrated. We also had this kind of system that we studied because, well, the wind can like blow the trees away. So the kind of anchor to the main vase. So yeah, this is in numbers. So 50 families of trees and almost like 230 species. So we wanted to boost the biodiversity in the city, so which is something that we really focus on as an office. So one of the book that Lorenzo was showing before, it's called BioCity, and well, that's what we've done. And we scatter. So we started investigation on which kind of which type of families we wanted to put in, and as I was saying before, we made like we also wanted to curate the display of these trees, so they are placed in an alphabetical order. So let's say from A to Z, but in the Korean alphabet. So if you walk left to right or right to left, then you will see, you know, all these trees in alphabetical order or counter alphabetical order. So yeah, this is one of the detailed drawings we have produced together with a Dutch landscape architect and also a local one. So, and where you see, you know, how we displace all these trees. So it took like us 17 months to get built. So initially we started like we wanted to realize or to envision what the future will look like. So we painted this the footprint of the tree pots on the bridge, and so to let the people experience it. And then after that, we kind of clean the floor and then restart the making the floor. So it's all prefab, as you see. And we also started putting this screen. So you see you can already foresee the future in this image. So here's another one. So here the concrete layer is done. So we left the spots for the pots. So yeah, and in the meantime, all the pots were produced like in a factory. So we were able to kind of compress the the time frame. So yeah, then we put them in place. We took the soil and then we planted almost 650 trees all along the surface. So here you see the roses. And well, immediately after we opened up the park, so people start using it, and yeah, like is it now like a very iconic place for Seoul, and people love it because it's like fresh, it's like friendly, it's like for pedestrian only, and also at night it's like quite a beautiful space. And I was saying you will find all the different types of vegetation, like from lilies to like real trees. And yeah, like, and what we really happy with is that like people from all the age use it. So is it like biodiverse, but it's also diverse in usage. So like elderly people as much as kids use the bridge daily. So we also scatter throughout the whole surface some activators. So what you see in the same language, so we use it as tripods as well, and also as activators for the people. So what you see now is like a bar, and well, here's how we built it. So of course we want to make use of the terrace, so you will always find like a tree and like a viewing spot. So here another example that goes in the same language of the bridge and the tripods. So yeah, this is another example. One more. Yeah, this is basically a performance stage. So we covered like the whole cultural spectrum from, let's say, exhibition to, well, stages. We also had like the food and beverage. We have like all the possible type of, yeah, this is a periscope, trampolines. So this is something that we really wanted to show. Is it actually the section of the bridge, as you see? And so it's very funny to see how people, you know, love this spot and look at the street below, you know, and then you have like this. Well, yeah, we kind of want to show the true nature of this piece of infrastructure. So, well, this was the day before we inaugurated, and we kind of thought this will also be the day after, the same situation of the day after. But actually, it was completely different. So, like almost 30,000 people show up. So it was so crowded that we couldn't even manage to meet the mayor because he was like among like these like huge flow of people. So these are the people who work at the project. So Vinimas was the director in charge. So Kyo is our like Korean senior project leader associate, who yeah, was in charge with the whole project. And this is Jakob, the other partner. So and then you see, you know, it was also difficult for them to walk around and reach the mayor and reach the stage where they could give a presentation. So yeah, people loved it. So like if you search on Instagram or other social, you will find tons of picture. So it's unbelievable the effect that, you know, it made on the city. So well, yeah, this is how I was saying, like people love to be here because it's fresh, it's like iconic, it's like funny. I mean, I think it embeds all the quality of MVRDV. So it truly express our DNA in a project. So yeah, people. So we kind of place like a good collection of all the possible usages. So from pool to trees, from trampolines to bar, from sitting to lamppost. So and it became like one of the most famous destination all around the world. So we're very happy to have two in this collection from the time, and well, as I was saying, the project was not like a entity per se, but we wanted to make it an organism that could expand and grow and connect more with the city. So what we have done was to add staircases and connection. So you see, it's not the bridge itself, but then we want this concept to expand in the city and like conquer other spaces and like revitalize them. So this is the staircase, this elevator. So here you see people going up and down. So it's like a friendly also for handicapped people. So here's another connection. So this is walking around, and what we're really happy with is that like we propose to connect the bridge with the surrounding buildings, and they accepted, and it was a big success. So as you see from this picture, is like the relation between the bridge and all these cafes around is like very strong. So now every single cafe want to be connected to the bridge. So another topic was like the night. So we want this place to be also very attractive and very iconic at night. So we have been analyzing, like a lot of color and a lot of possibility. And then we basically were looking at the sky and at like performances. So the blue tone was kind of a symbol for that. And what we've done, it was to put like a LED strip all around the pots so that they could light up at night. And the blue light, it's very good for the plants, because well, the blue and the red part of the spectrum heals the plant, help them to grow and recover. So at night, what we do at night with the lights is to help the plant to be healthy. So because of course they are part of like inside of the city, so you have a lot of pollution and stuff. So with the blue light, we can help them to be healthy. So, and it's like magic, and then it turns into a completely new beauty. It's like a magical atmosphere to be in. And we always think of the project we do in an holistic way. So we wanted to have like the same color all along the skywalk, so that it could be like super recognizable. And believe me, like kids go there and kiss, and a teenager and like people go there at night to experience these, because you will be floored by this blue light. So this was when we built it, the inauguration day in 2017, and today these trees grown a lot. And what's very funny and what's like really important for us was that the project appears like differently throughout the year. So when it blossoms in the spring, or when it's like fully green in summer, you will experience a different. You will have different feelings, and you will have a different aspect. So then it's not a project that you go there and see once, but it's something that you want to experience like almost every day, because every day is different. So I believe you had the experience like looking out of the window, looking at the tree, and then it changed. But then when you have like 24,000, it changed enormously, and it changed the feeling you get in the city. So from winter to summer. So again, this was the inauguration day, and this is today. So it's much greener, and so yeah, you see it basically took over the whole street. So as I was saying, we didn't want to leave the project as a entity, but we wanted to make it part of a system. So we thought that we could make a master plan and envision different branches that extend throughout the city, conquering new spaces and making new, greening the whole city. So this is how Seoul look like, but this is how we wanted to make it in the future. So it's green, it's pedestrian friendly, is it like place for the people. So this is basically a parking lot, and this is the very heart of Seoull. This is a wonderful. This could be a wonderful place, and that's what we wanted to turn into. So you see dead hands and parking spaces like very dirty, and so this is the kind of future we want to create, and we want Seoul to be like the test site, to be like a place where everybody can So from like a very polluted city to like a very green city. So from like a very anonymous street to a super iconic one. So, well, from the entrance to the highway, which usually is dirty, noisy, it could become like a connection and a pivotal point in the city. So, yeah. So here you see the GIF and how we thought of this. So from like car oriented city to a pedestrian oriented city in which we can create and boost also the economy, creating like new developments and expanding the city, densifying the city, and creating a better city. So this is a project that Zadi built in a nearby area, and it costed like 400 million euro. So our project cost 8 times less. And as you see, the guy over there, it was like also a bloody expensive. And in terms of return of images, so people experienced our Seoull bridge way more than the other two, because also it's public and is accessible for all. So to conclude, the vision we have is to expand Seoull all around the city here. It's also to create a ring out of the city. So we wanted to really transform Seoull from the most polluted city in the world to the less polluted city in the world, to the more green. And we have the dream to transform like these abandoned pieces of infrastructure into social infrastructure, into green infrastructure. So it's sort of changing the world we know and transforming into like a new reality. And I believe this is it.
So this is about temporary things in Venice and floating things in Venice. And sometimes, more often than not, the floating things are also temporary. So, and Venice has the idea of being temporary is a little bit embodied in the city, because it feels like the city is temporary, and at any moment in time, the water will kind of reclaim the space, and sometimes we are reminded of it because of the floodings, but it's also temporary because it's a city that works very much based on seasons, on fluxes of tourism, on events, special events. Right now, by the way, today I'm in Venice. And right now there is the G20 in Venice. So there is a big event in the Arsenale. Everything is sealed off, and it's quite difficult to circulate around the city. So this idea of temporary in Venice is very present, and it's been present forever. Here I'm just showing to you that all the major bridges that were built throughout time in Venice, they all started as temporary structures, all started in wood. And then once they became permanent, once the technology allowed and they became permanent, well, basically they would turn into stone. The stone is, stone in Venice is the material of permanence, let's say. And everything else, which is any other material, really is a material of temporary. So the Rialto Bridge, this is from 1494. It was built in 1591. So this was about 100 years before this was built, which is the one you see today. There used to be a temporary wooden structure that would open, would basically, if I recall, would lift this side, and the ship could go in the middle. So and basically this idea of starting as a temporary test let's see if it works, and then we make it permanent. It translated over the centuries. So the other two bridges over the Grand Canal are Scalzi Bridge and the Academia Bridge. And the Scalzi Bridge was actually built in 1858. It was a time when Venice was under the Austrian Empire regime. So, and they decided that Venice needed a lot of work for a lot of urban development. And among the many things they did, they thought about building two new bridges across the Grand Canal when there was only Rialto. So this is the bridge made in iron. It's made by an English engineer called Neville. So that's the Neville structure from 1858, which was eventually temporary because in between 1932 and 1934, an Italian engineer, Mattozzi, finally made the final structure, which is the bridge you see today. And it's kind of neat to see this photo where you see the two structures next to each other. So by the time the new one was built, they removed the old one. And by doing these two new bridges, the Scalzi and the Academia, in the middle of the 1800s, the Austrians radically changed the way you move by foot around Venice forever, basically. So this is the Scalzi Bridge, this is the Academia Bridge, and what might be interesting for you to know is that they removed the Neville structure while they were doing a competition. They decided to build this temporary bridge in wood in 37 days. So this was really a temporary solution while they were waiting for the result of the competition. This is the result of the competition. This is the winner. So this is the bridge that was supposed to be built, which looks a little bit like the Scalzi Bridge, and eventually was never built. So what you see today, with a lot of maintenance, a lot of additional reinforcements in steel and so on, but it's basically the same temporary bridge from the 1932, 1934, whatever the year was. So this is a case where temporary becomes permanent because of indecision, and this also happens in Venice. And then I want to show you something very traditional. This photo is probably from the 1970s, late 1970s, beginning of 1980s. But Venice has the movie festival in Lido, but at the same time that the movie festival is happening in Lido, usually there is an open air cinema which takes place temporarily in one of the squares. So at the beginning it was in Campo Sant'Angelo, and it was a scaffolding structure which was built. It would last for about a month. First 2 weeks was all the movies from the previous year, and then the last 2 weeks were the actual movies running at the movie festival in Lido. And then the square, they changed the square. It became Campo San Polo, but it's the same idea. It becomes a sealed area with some scaffolding for higher seatings, and this runs for about a month. I don't know if it runs to this day, but it ran until a few years ago. This is a work by Alvarado at the Giardino of the Biennale. This was a commission. He had only 2 weeks to come up with the plans. And the idea for this was always to be built and then, something that you could easily demount and put away. It was never thought to be permanent. It was a very temporary pavilion. And this is when they were building it in 1956. And then eventually, it stayed, and it is still there today. It became the official pavilion for Finland. And next to it, this was just a few years ago, in 2014, someone did sort of an additional temporary pavilion. But in this case, this really disappeared after the event. This is, as I was mentioning the other day, this is the entrance for the Biennale, the ticket sales and press, where they release material to the press as well. It was done in the Giardini just before entering the Biennale area. It was nice. It was made of several pieces, so these pieces could be distributed around the city, and they could be informative. And also, some of these pieces could travel to other cities to advertise the Biennale in Venice. So they could be in Rome, they could be in Genova, they could be in other places. It was a smart idea, and then eventually it was removed. This is art. So this is just an example. Of course, once we talk about the Biennale and art, I would say almost every year there is something temporary, something around the city that you can see, and then it gets removed. So this is just a very tiny sample. So this is the Lorenzo Quinn who made these hands, and the name of the artwork is Support Venice. And then this is by a local designer, local Venetian designer. This was in front of a museum in Zattere, and it was just, I think, it was related to the exhibition running in the museum. So there were some videos about that, and it was just had a very brief life. But it was a nice installation, simple to make, simple to build, completely reusable. It's basically fabric and wood. This is again Lorenzo Quinn. I'm going in basically chronological order. So this is just 2 years ago, and it's still there. It's still there today. And it's what I didn't know. It's that actually each of them has a meaning. So one is the sign of love, one is the sign of wisdom, help, and so on. This is within the Arsenale, and I think it's adjacent to I think this was only possible because the municipality bought this area here. So I believe this is not used anymore for ship construction or ship repairing. It's interesting because in 2020, I found out, I didn't know, that there were many sort of temporary and events based on the use of the boat, because suddenly the boat was super safe during COVID time. So you were outdoor, first of all, and then by being in a boat, you were automatically isolated from other people. So within the Arsenale, they had this sort of drive-in, but with boats. So they called it Bacchin. Barca in Italian is boat. So it's like boat in. And so it's kind of neat. I don't know how long it lasted, I guess a few weeks, maybe a few days. And then you could go with your boat inside the Arsenale and look at a movie, watch a movie. The same, a little bit more fancy, this time sponsored by Campari, was a similar event. But in this case, it was called Campari Boat in Cinema, but it actually looks more like art installation with projections directly on the warehouses of the Arsenale. Looks quite interesting. So those are some of the examples of temporary things that happen in Venice, and there are many more. And this is about floating elements. So Venice makes almost no use of floating architecture or floating structures or floating devices. In others, I mean, Cosimo and I, we reside in the Netherlands, and there is plenty of boat houses, and and you have restaurants on boats, and you have all sorts of things on boats, and in Venice just doesn't happen. There used to be a Danish family living in a vaporetto, so they bought an old vaporetto, refurbished it, made it into an apartment, let's say. But eventually, I think they left. They had to abandon Venice. So the only permanent elements that are also floating are the vaporetto stoves. Also, I mean, they're permanent in the sense that you will always see one, but it might not be the same one, because one of the advantages of these is that they can be repaired. You just take the one that needs to be repaired and you substitute it. But I would say those are the main floating elements that are always there. And then there are many temporary floating elements for recurring events. So as I was explaining, There are 4 days where they build bridges of barges, and so this is for the marathon, and it's between Punta de la Dogana and San Marco. So it's the area more or less of Jasper. And this is the other bridge, which is for Salute, which is also, it's a little bit further here, which is also kind of the area of Jasper. So the link of Jasper will be in between these two, let's say. But you can see in this case, they need to let the boat go so that this is the navigational envelope they leave. In this other case, for that day, the boats just don't pass. So that's and these other two are more this links basically from here to Giudecca. So this is the Church of Redentore, and this is from Fondamenta Nuove to the island of San Michele, which is the cemetery. So 3 of these bridges are in the southern part of the city, and this one is in the northern part of the city. It's also I discovered it's one company basically that does all these bridges every time. This is it's a renowned structure that used to be in Venice. It's called Teatro del Mondo, the Theater of the World. It was built in the occasion of a Biennale of Architecture and Theater. So this was to provide an additional theater with a central plan. You can see here the drawings. It was a little bit taking inspiration from the idea of Alvise Corner, of which I spoke in the very first the very first day. Alvise Corner was this nobleman from the 16th century, who envisioned a stone theater floating in front of San Marco, and basically this is, except for the stone part, this is what it is. It was marooned next to Punta de la Dogana, and the size was dictated exactly by this. So it had to be more or less, the architect Aldo Rossi wanted it to be more or less the same height. And the whole, well, it looks in wood from outside, but it's only cladded in wood. The whole structure is scaffolding. It's fully scaffolding. So this theater stayed for the duration of the Biennale, I think 5 months probably. And then it actually traveled to Dubrovnik in Croatia, where it stayed for maybe an additional year and eventually was dismantled. And this is just, it was a pavilion about cities on water. It was during the Biennale, it was done by a Venetian architect. It was very simple, again, very simple technology. It was really temporary, but it was okay. This is the plan. Those are the covered docking area of the Arsenale. So it was quite neat. Actually, the photo, I couldn't find very good photos, but in reality, was a little bit better than what it looks like. This is the Croatian pavilion, which traveled from Croatia to Venice, and it arrived to Venice, and then they made a mistake with the boats, and then on the day basically they had to inaugurate it. It just fell into the water. So you will see, if you look it up, you will see the photos all the pavilion destroyed. So it was the pavilion that never came to be, but it was actually quite beautiful, and it was done with with the steel rebars. So it's all steel rebars, but they create a space inside. There is a certain, it's sort of the structure is almost invisible or translucent, and when you go inside, it's also quite beautiful. So it was a simple pavilion, very beautiful, but got lost in the lagoon. This is more recently in 2016. So this is an original project by Kunle Adeyemi. Originally, he built it in 2013 in Nigeria to work as a school. Eventually, it was so this was almost a prototype. So eventually, this was deemed unsafe and was destroyed. But in 2016, he basically made the version 2.0, which was with prefab elements. It was a little bit better, and he presented it at the Biennale, and he was awarded the Silver Lion for this. So it was a nice addition. You could step in. It was an interesting thing to see. And then there are temporary. So those are temporary recurrent events. Most of them have to deal with the Biennale, and these are temporary unique events. So these only happened once, and this is from 1989. It's the infamous Pink Floyd's concert. I say infamous because in a way it was a nice idea, but the city was completely overcrowded. There were not enough public toilets. I mean, after the concert, the city was just trash. I mean, what you see here as people, it became quickly trash. So it was just unprepared. Venice just didn't need so many people at the same time, and yet the concert was quite amazing. You could see the concert from your boat or from the square, and it attracted a lot of people. You can even see videos of this concert on YouTube. And this is, I found out it was just last year. There was this is in Giudecca, just outside Giudecca. And Gambero Rosso, it's a gastronomic magazine. So I don't know exactly what this festival was about. I suppose about food. But they set up this floating cinema, and people could watch it from either from the Fundamenta or from the boats. So this is just to show you some of the things that have been done in Venice in this regard, because this might be, I mean, we don't know what you want to do, but it's just, you can think of something permanent, you can think of something temporary, you can think of something floating. Now, floating and permanent is a little bit more complicated. It requires a lot of maintenance. So, but that's just to give you a broad idea. We have a guest, and this is Taneha Kuzniecow Bacchin. So just for you to know, Taneha is an architect and urban designer who graduated at UAV, University of Venice. Hello, Taneha. How are you?
Hello.
Okay. So thank you.
Nice
Thank you
for
Thank you for being here. We have here Cosimo, which
Hi, Taneha.
you know.
Hi.
Hi,
Nice to see
Cosimo.
you. Okay.
Who you know already. And we have 7 students from the University of Melbourne. They are located in different parts of the world, mostly in China, but not only. And I think Indonesia and Melbourne, of course, we have as well. And so Taneha holds a double PhD in Transcalar Landscape Infrastructure Design for Flood Risk Management from TU Delft and UNESCO IHE. So currently, she's an assistant professor of urban design theory and methods at the Faculty of Architecture and the Built Environment of TU Delft. And for the same institutions, she's also the head of the research section of urban design and Delta Urbanism Research Group. So she is really an expert in water-related design, and she's been researching this for many, many years. So we're really happy and honored to have her, and she will give us a lecture about Venice and the lagoon. The title is Waterscript, Venice and the Lagoon. She will talk on the relation between nature and culture as anthropocenic constructs and via the history and morphology of the Venice Lagoon. So the Venice Lagoon, let's say, as a case study, as an example, to make a wider considerations about the relation between nature and culture. So I hope it will be informative to you. It will give you some more insights about where Venice is located and how Venice was built. So Taneha, the floor is to you. Please begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Lorenzo. I'm going to start sharing screen. And once again, it's a great honor. It's my honor and pleasure to be with you today. So the title, actually, the Waterscript, because it's somehow the idea that Venice in itself, it's a language of water. So the making, the evolution of Venice, and especially of its lagoon, it's very much a very important, let's say, human construct, and in constant change and evolution. But I would like especially to take actually Venice as an example, as a figure of modernity. I'm gonna use this idea throughout the lecture today. In this idea, let's say that as a modern project, we can perhaps we can say that the infrastructural design, the different forms of infrastructural design that we can actually see, and you have been mapping in the context of Venice and lagoon, it's by themselves the expression of the making of the production of landscape and territory. So the very strong tide between, and the rationality and the strong tides between infrastructure, landscape, and the making, let's say, the act of territoriality. But to start with some basic definitions, so the landscape, and especially again in the context of the Venice lagoon, it's about shaping land. So very much the act of shaping, of forming land. But the landscape, as we know, and even as stated by the European Landscape Convention, it's actually something that it's both made of humans, let's say, of natural forces, and actually human actions. So it's the combination, it's this hybrid, let's say, the hybrid condition between human actions and natural processes. But if then we look into, let's say, the specificity of a waterscape, we can call it Venice as an important waterscape. Also, some definitions are interesting to characterize Venice, that it's the waterscape being basically a representation of a body of water, but actually in the context of Venice, we can tell that we can actually describe Venice by the way in which water travels in time and space, and it's shaped by culture and geography. But not only that, also from the point of view of, let's say, the meaning embedded in political ecology tradition, the role of power and the contested nature of water in diverse rural, urban, and peri-urban landscapes. So again, the making of land, the making of the production of landscape, and in such a context of waterscapes, it's very much a action of power, of a condition of production, of territoriality. And the making of territory, it has a very strong, it is an operation of social relational power. So all of these dimensions, again, between landscape, in specific waterscape, and territory are very much defining of Venice and its lagoon. And then finally, the act of infrastructure. And I always like to use this short quote by Deleuze and Guattari: desire is part of the infrastructure. Infrastructure, we know that it's, let's say, anything that actually supports social functions. And in the making and the constant regulation and the active maintenance of the Venice lagoon, we are constantly designing and, let's say, evolving forms of infrastructure to support the city, to support actually the existing of this Venice as we know. But another small theoretical addition to that, it's actually in this idea of Venice being a figure of modernity. Bruno Latour in 1991, he wrote about the idea that we have never been modern. And actually what he poses is that the modern project normally brings to the table the clear distinction between nature and society. He actually he challenges that, saying that this distinction never actually existed, not even by means of the modern project. That actually what we see, it's a work of translation between the two systems, between nature and culture, or nature and society, and what actually we experience and the environment in which we live, it's actually a hybrid. It's constituted by hybrid networks between, again, culture, human culture, and non-human natural processes. So once again, Venice, it's a model. In that sense, it's a unique model and a manifestation of such a, let's say, work of translation between nature and culture. The Venice Lagoon could not exist as it is today without the human interventions that suffered throughout history, and that continues to experience on a daily basis by means of maintenance and restorations. So it's a short lecture, but I'm gonna try to walk you through some important aspects of the history of the morphological evolution of the lagoon and this, let's say, the very strong connection with important moments in its social and political history and economic history. To start with, there is a very interesting interview from February this year by Domenico Patassini, which is a professor from UF, University of Venice, which is called Design for a Lasting Present. So basically he describes Venice within this idea that it's a system that is constantly being designed to last in the present. But not only that, he also describes Venice and, let's say, characterize Venice and its lagoon as an example of a complex social ecosystem. So once again, referring back to Bruno Latour, this hybrid, let's say, condition between nature, natural processes, and human activities. So Venice, it's not only a city of art, it is an inhabited lagoon. It's an example of a complex social ecosystem, but also a transitional environment located, as you know, in the northeast part of the Adriatic coast. Venice and its lagoon is defined by a phenomenon, which is the sediment balance, in which we either have deficit of sediments or surplus of sediments. And actually that very much defines the daily condition of the lagoon. So, and this, let's say, the balance of sediments, it's influenced by the dynamics of the lagoon, its connection to the sea, and because of that, we can say that Venice and its lagoon, it's a laboratory of experimentation and reversibility from a planning and management point of view. So it is a landscape or a waterscape of flux, erasure, and terraforming in constant, on a daily basis. The lagoon morphology depends on the relationship that is established between the contribution of soil materials from the sea or from the rivers, let's say actually the adjacent water basins, and the erosive action of waves and tides. And what's quite striking, I'm just showing some satellite imageries that you by now are very familiar with. It's the different patternation, so the different patterns of occupation between the lagoon, let's say the ecosystem of the lagoon, but also the islands, the urban occupation, and as you can see in this picture, also Porto Marghera, so the industrial part, let's say the industrial side, the heavy industrial side of the lagoon. The communication, also a very important part of the lagoon, actually, it's not only the islands and the lagoon itself and its connection to the adjacent inland, but also the important three inlands towards the sea. So what you can see here, for instance, this is the Lido inland, and the communication with the sea actually determines the brackish character of the lagoon. So on a daily basis, we have marine intrusion, actually the tidal movement in and out throughout the mounts, which are 3 in total again. At the same time, this tidal movement modifies and shapes the physical configuration of the lagoon, either in an erosive way or actually in a terraforming way. So as we saw, the mouth of Lido, Malamocco, and finally Chioggia in the southern part of the lagoon. So sea and lagoon communicate with each other through these 3 inlands. The Venice Lagoon is the largest lagoon, it's the largest Italian lagoon. It has about 550 square kilometers, of which 418 square kilometers are open to tidal excursion. So the lagoon it's highly exposed to the sea in the upper Adriatic. which is the largest of the Mediterranean. 78% of the surface of the Venice lagoon is characterized by large stretches of water crossed by a dense network of channels of varying depth. And these channels, they are constantly being maintained throughout time. From the territory that constitutes the drainage basin, the lagoon receives the freshwater component. The lagoon is characterized and composed by a number of very characteristic landscape elements, which we can tell that they actually are also infrastructural. Seabeds, mud flats and sandbanks, islands, fishing valleys, landfill gates, and finally the coastal lines, the forms of coastal protection. From a hydrodynamic point of view, the lagoon is governed by the tides of the upper Adriatic Sea, which enter and leave the lagoon twice a day. The moon, actually, we also say that Venice, it's a city of the moon because it's heavily influenced, let's say the behavior of the lagoon, it's heavily influenced by astronomic conditions. So twice a day we have, let's say the tides that enter the lagoon, reaching to 2 maximum and 2 minimum points, as you can see in this diagram. So there is a semi-daily tides. At the lagoon ecosystem level, and you can see especially here, this is just a diagram showing how from the 20th century to the 21st century, the distribution of tides actually changed, and that's an outcome as well because of changing sea levels, but also because of the, let's say, the internal morphological change of the lagoon. So we can say that actually on an ecosystem, on a systemic level, there are 2 very important elements from a landscape infrastructural point of view that helps on the regulation, that have a very strong regulatory and protective value, especially against flooding. But especially one has a very contested value and discussed value, and another one has an extremely important landscape natural value, but also extremely fragile. So the first one, as I guess you know by now, it's the Mose, the very contested Mose, which actually it's a system of barriers consisting of row gates, as you can see here in action. Actually, the Mose most recently was put in action in February this year, and it's installed in the seabed of the inlands, in this case of the inland of Chioggia, which allow the lagoon to be temporarily separated from the sea when a high water event is expected. The Mose is calculated to be able to withstand tides up to 3 meters, and actually even to protect from a sea level rise of about 60 centimeters which expected in the next 100 years. Again, these projections are still being contested. The second important landscape in this context, very much landscape element, I'm sorry for the resolution of the image, landscape element of a very strong infrastructural value in the lagoon. It's what it's called the barene, what you see in the picture in yellow. The barene, actually, they are sandbanks. They're very unique of the Venetian lagoon, very characterizing, let's say, of the Venetian lagoon. And the sandbanks, together with mud flats and the shallows, they constitute one of the most characteristic, but also most fragile environments of the lagoon ecosystem. They are subject, as you can imagine, to the tidal waves, to the tidal flux, to surface variations depending, but also on the quantity of sediments, of materials arriving to the lagoon, for instance, silt, sand, and other sediments. So they either lose the sediments or actually they acquire sediments. So again, it's a process of either erosion or terraforming. If there is no balance between the consolidation process and the erosion process, then it means that eventually we're going to lose the barene. And it's a phenomenon that has been happening in the past years. So what we can say now, let's say, as what you saw as the basic, let's say, a number of basic landscape elements, as we said, of infrastructural value in the regulation of the Venice lagoon and in the constitution, let's say, of its condition of human inhabitation, of social functions. But in the future, those elements in place, they might not be able actually, according to the projections, to withstand the rising of sea level and the climatic change, but also the solidification of the sediments coming from the adjacent rivers and the water basin. So what you see in this diagram, as you can see, it's quite striking. It's the progression, let's say, the rising of the average sea level in Venice, and you can expect that actually perhaps the Mose might not be able to withstand such a pressure from the sea. So then the question is actually what might be other forms of even a new paradigm that we might envision in the maintenance again of the lagoon as a place of inhabitation, of human inhabitation. So, but we can specifically point into two phenomena that are very strong stressors to the future of Venice. So again, the first one, the extreme sea level rise, and the second one, as I said, the compactness of alluvial soils arriving to the sea. So the combination of these two phenomena, for instance, in the recent years, changed the decking level of Venice, with actually that dropped off 27 centimeters, which is quite remarkable. And the projections actually said that in the upcoming future, we might even have a drop of between 30 and 60 centimeters of the decking level. So therefore, what we can conclude is that Venice lives from the movement of the sea and of climatic change, a system that needs to be constantly regulated to avoid its transformation into a swamp or actually into becoming a sea. That it's a destiny of the lagoon without any regulation of humans in its environment. And that's something that actually, so this regulatory effort of the lagoon, this maintenance of the lagoon as a lagoon system and as a space of human environment, for human inhabitation, has been happening for more than 2,000 years. This is a quite striking picture. It's the combination, you as well know quite well by now, Cristoforo Sabadino, which was a very important hydraulic engineer for Venice, changing quite dramatically, let's say, the constitution of the Venice lagoon. And I will walk you through some of his historical maps, actually showing the transformation, the morphological evolution of the lagoon throughout the centuries. But this, especially this image, shows the juxtaposition of a map of the lagoon made by Sabadino in the 1506, and actually with the juxtaposition of the lagoon as the perimeter of the lagoon as approved in 1792. And this perimeter of the lagoon didn't change as much as of today. So there is a very strong, let's say, still presence, let's say, of the system which was envisioned and mapped by Sabadino in the 16th century. So, as I said, using two important texts as reference for the lecture, The Morphological Evolution of the Venice Lagoon by Luigi Del Pos, which I recommend you, if you're curious to learn more, to read it, to have a look, especially for the beautiful maps and drawings and in the text. But also a narrative, actually, which is a comparison between two deltaic systems, which is the Venice lagoon and the Rhine system in the Netherlands, by Han Meyer, and especially the importance of the port activities as a strong infrastructural act in the making of infrastructure and territory in these two conditions. So he talks about Venice being formed by gradual processes, but also by radical strategies. And I would like to start with the first radical strategy that we can tell, let's say, point out in the very beginning of the history of Venice, in its foundation, which at the start, sediment supply was a condition of city building. So the Venice lagoon, it's, as I said, it's an alluvial landscape, an outcome of the dynamics of rivers and sea during the last 10,000 years after the last ice age. The sediments transported by the rivers as well by the tidal currents of the sea created the lagoon system with long stretches of dune and beach formations at the edge. And with sandbanks, mudflats, and wetlands in the lagoon, we've got overgrown vegetation finally resulting in new land. That's the drawing made by Meyer that you can see in the upper part of the slide. 2,000 years ago, the current lagoon, as you can see, was part of a long system of lagoons stretching from Trieste to Ravenna. Most of the lagoons of the system have been silted up as a result of this process of land making by sedimentation and vegetation, in some places supported by man-made reclamations. This actually, following that, sorry, let me go back. It's also quite interesting that we can see then in the zoom, in the drawing of Meyer on the initial formation of the historical island of Venice, historical center of Venice, is what then, let's say, from the system, from the constitution of out of the process again of sedimentation and the tidal influence of the lagoon, we had then the formation of specific islands, and especially the major island, the historical center of Venice. It's interesting to see and understand also by the drawing how the small islands constituting the fish actually were formed. The highest one, which actually it was called the Rivo Alto, the high bank, it's what we now know as Rialto. The physical state of this, which actually the fish, it's an archipelago in itself, and it's constituted by small islands and mudflats that actually offered a condition for inhabitation to take place. So what happened then is that in each one of these small islands inside the archipelago of Venice, of the island of Venice, was that in each one of these small islands, the first forms of inhabitation was to offer a small space for parish, which normally was dominated by one or two families, and all around a central square, or what we know it's called the campo. So that was, and still is very much, of course, the morphological configuration of the historical island of Venice. And the relative large and deep meandering tidal creek canal, what's called the Canal Grande, was then, let's say, the central axis of the island, of this actually archipelago. The second important radical, let's say, phase and strategy that led to a very important modification of the lagoon and its system of islands, it's actually the moment for the, let's say, the strong movement to foster maritime power, in which then we can see the opposite process. Instead of sediment accumulation, then it was about stopping sediment supply as a condition for maritime development. And what you see now, using some of the drawings of Sabadino, of Cristoforo Sabadino, the importance, let's say, of basically stopping the inlet influence of the rivers into the lagoon. So to avoid more sediments to be accumulated, to be dragged by the rivers into the lagoon. So what you can see here, it's a map of Sabadino, in which he proposes to basically divert the Brent, especially the river Brent, but also the river Baglione, to a different mouth of the Brontolo lagoon. So the first important act in this to allow for this maritime power to take place was the diversion and let's say the change of the flow of the rivers into the lagoon system, again, to avoid more and more sedimentation to take place. So to avoid more land to be shaped. And this actually, you can see also in this drawing, the ousters of the Brent and the Bacchiglione rivers that have actually the diversion of them have a very decisive results in the fate of the lagoon, in actually what the lagoon is even nowadays. And actually it marked the beginning of a turnaround in the morphological evolution of the lagoon. Once again, some more drawings showing basically that you can see the lagoon, it's quite shallow. There are some major canals for navigation, and that was very important to, let's say, to design, to envision what would be this system of channels, the systems of navigation that would then be, let's say, provided for the maritime system to take place eventually. Again, also, I guess it's a well-known drawing by you now, which is the plan of the archipelago of Venice, of the historical island of Venice, proposed by Sabadino, in which actually he proposes to have, let's say, a continuous possibility of movement and connection in the at the edge of the archipelago, of the island, of the main island. But not only from the point of view, let's say, of social functions and use, but especially also as an important defense system of the urban fabric. We continue with some more of this, and you can see in time, basically the evolution of the lagoon, and especially a very important moment eventually is the modification of the lagoon in preparation of what then will become the installment of its industrial activities, especially represented by the making of Porto Marghera, which is the cargo, the economic, let's say, port embedded in the city. But starting actually with the idea, let's say, of digging and designing, let's say, a system of channels for maritime movement was, we can say that the San Spirito Canal was the most, let's say, relevant one at the start, which actually connected the sea to San Marco Basin by means of, let's say, by the mouth, the Malamocco mouth. And this was a canal which was constantly being, the section of the canal was constantly being adjusted to, let's say, allowed for more movement and maritime, let's say, flow to take place. So the result of this, let's say, of this radical strategy of changing the shallow configuration of the lagoon, stopping as much as possible sediments to be accumulated, and therefore forming more land, more islands, let's say, inside the lagoon, was what actually provided for the basis of the industrial phase to take place eventually in the 19th, especially in the 19th century. And actually, what we see now, so in this drawing by Henmeyer, is some sort of, let's say, a gradual transformation of the lagoon into a transition zone between land and water, from fresh and salt into a sharply bordered saltwater area separated from the rivers and the freshwater area at the east by the system of canals. As a result of the deviation of the Po, the typical delta lobe of the Po River started to grow south of the Venice Lagoon. So even, let's say, the delta, the Po River delta was influenced by the modifications which were made in the lagoon. The third let's say, important moment in the evolution of the morphology of the lagoon, it's then, again, as I introduced, the process of excavation then of sediments as a condition for industrial development. So again, we started with the accumulation of sediments as a first condition of inhabitation. We moved then to allow for maritime power to take place, instead the stopping of sediments to be accumulated in the lagoon. And then finally, the third radical movement in its morphological evolution was then the act of excavation. So the need to excavate deeper channels to allow for bigger ships, basically, to enter the lagoon system. And this is what also it's said to be the major cause of flood risk nowadays in Venice and its lagoon, because of the strong flow and entrance of, let's say, a very high wave movement and, let's say, the quantity, the volume of seawater actually entering the lagoon system. So you can see just in the sequence of, again, of the hydrological, hydrographic and hydrological maps of the Venice Lagoon, how much actually it changed especially in the past 2 centuries. Finally arriving to the most recent configuration of, you can see in dark blue, its system of the main channels, the smaller channels of navigation, supporting both harbors, the tourist harbor in the historical island of Venice and the commercial port in Marghera. And then continuing, especially in the let's say in the importance of the Porto Marghera, not only Porto Marghera, but also, as you're going to see in a couple of slides from here, the making of even of the airport. Important works from the point of view of landfills, to allow for more, let's say, large surfaces to be occupied by industry and infrastructure. And that, again, you can imagine the impact of such a, again, making of landfills and platforms of land to support infrastructure in the very fragile, let's say, dynamic equilibrium of the lagoon ecosystem. So especially the Porto Marghera around 1920s, the construction of it actually made this strong movement of reclaiming land to allow for the platforms of the port to be constructed. And then we can see a very strong, in that sense, also the beginning of a very strong distinction between the urban fabric of the lagoon, of the islands, of the places of inhabitation inside the lagoon, so the historical urban fabric within the lagoon, and the modern, let's say, fabric being then developed in Marghera and Mestre. So a clear distinction in scale, size, and impact into the environment of these 2 forms of occupation. Again, a map showing some of the important, let's say, fuel boxes which were made for the industrial zones, and finally some of the final modifications. The important institutional system in place was actually the Magistrato alle Acque, which was an institution responsible for the management of, let's say, of water, of different dimensions of water, and the lagoon system in place, and something that unfortunately in 2014 stopped existing. But that was a very important political institution, again, in the making of Venice, its landscape and territory. And some pictures of the construction of the airport, and finally the most recent hydrographic map of the Venice lagoon. So what we can see actually at the end is this 3, as Hanmeyer called, 3 important moments on its modification: accumulation of sediments, stopping of sediments, and excavation of the canals. The question that I would like to pose to you is that if we would, the need actually, not only that we would actually, we need to start envisioning a different paradigm in the maintenance and even in projecting change to a certain extent for the survival of the Venice Lagoon as a place of inhabitation. So what might be a 4th phase in the, again, in the morphological evolution of the lagoon? The Mose, it's not sufficient, it's just a barrier in itself. If we would even think about, for instance, along something that is very common in the Netherlands, the use of dikes, a 2nd row of dikes at the sea. Also, it's not going to be sufficient to withstand the projections that we have about extreme sea level rise. So then, as we saw in this idea of thinking, as we saw from the work especially of Cristoforo Sabadino, of the lagoon as a anthropogenic system regulated by human actions in close connection and observance of natural processes, what might be a different paradigm that we could envision? And for instance, Domenico Patassini claimed that even the response might be at the sea level, at the Adriatic basin. So it's not something that can be just resolved at, well, for sure, not in the scale of the historical island, archipelago of Venice, not even in the scale of its lagoon. It's something that might even have had to take, let's say, the full scale of the Adriatic Sea into consideration, but not only that, also the upstream part of the lagoon. So really taking from upstream to downstream and envisioning change in a very much systemic and transcolored way. Somehow, let's say, in the context of, let's say, of this idea of the modern project, the acknowledgement of the effects of flooding in the social life of Venice has some important moments. One of these important moments, it's the historical flooding of 1966, in which actually was very dramatic aqua alta that we also saw more recently in November 2019. In this historical aqua alta, about 76% of the city was flooded. In the most recent of 2019, about 70% of the surface of the historical archipelago island of Venice was flooded with more than €1 billion in damage. So it's a condition to be flooded in Venice, to experience the aqua alta. It's a condition of the life in the city. But knowing, again, the projections that we have in front, the expected change in terms of rising sea level and rising temperatures, this, let's say, this flexibility that now it's embedded in the life of Venice, as you can see in the use, for instance, of the platforms to maintain, well, the possibility to cross the city from one place to another, even when it's flooded, this might not be sufficient anymore. So then again, my point is that small scale interventions, even the MOSE in this context, can be seen as a very small scale intervention, not sufficient to respond to the expected environmental changes. This is the flooding, one of the most recent floodings. And well, again, what type of, let's say, of condition of flexibility of adaptation we might envision in its future. So there is the necessity of a new balance of the city, the port, as one of its main causes of, let's say, of risk, and the making of landscape. Again, as you can see, the historical evolution, for instance, of the bathymetry in the mouth of Lido, which is quite remarkable, but also in another zoom in the context of the lagoon. So there is a strong, let's say, there have been strong changes taking place throughout history with, let's say, to a certain extent, a calculated risk, but in light of the, let's say, the two phenomena that I described in the beginning, rising sea levels and let's say the solidification of the seabed and of the alluvial soil, well, there is a very strong risk in front of us. This is a very interesting, I brought a table from, it's a very interesting article that compares the adaptation to flood risk between Venice and Miami, and actually what may be the transferability between the two cases. But just as you see, again here, kind of historical, let's say, stepwise changes in the type of measures of infrastructural works which were made to withstand flood risk. So starting with in the 1700s, the construction of the walls, which are called murazzi, which were always made of cemented rocks. What is the pro and the con of that? Well, the con, it's a barrier system that has been tagneted to continue up to the level in which actually we arrived to the MOSE, as I introduced to you before, which is called actually the MOSE. It's abbreviation for experimental electromechanical model, which, well, is now completed. It was recently again put in action, But as I said, it's a contested infrastructure because it might not be able to, to respond to the upcoming rising of sea level. Some recommendations on the future: the elevation of San Marco Square to protect the historical square. It's not being yet implemented, extremely costly. That would be one of the cons of that. Another recommendation from 2016 from the Veneto regional government is an integrated management of the coastal zone, which actually it's a study and monitoring for the definition of interventions to protect the coast from erosion in the Veneto region. It's a comprehensive plan and includes climate change adaptation measures, but not yet implemented. But this is an important point, let's say, this also this aspect, as Domenico Patassini says, of the experimental nature of planning actions in the context of Venice and its lagoon, and the need for systemic responses, the need for systemic designs. Again, what happened very recently in 2019, but knowing that this actually would be even much higher according to extreme sea level rise projections. This is quite scary in a way, but it's it's what we might expect. So once again, my question to you is how to envision a different paradigm. Something that it's not only becomes, let's say, even you can, if you search, you're gonna see the even, let's say, the life, the tourist life in Venice that actually to a certain extent accepts and very much even makes unexpectable of the condition of flooding. But then once again, the level of damage and the rising level of damage in the upcoming future makes a very strong call to rethink the idea of modernity. No, so this, as I said in the beginning, the rationality between infrastructural making, landscape production, and territoriality. An important action in this future, it's actually the closure of the let's say of the possibility of closing the navigability of the cruises, of the tourism cruises that now passes in the Giudecca Canal, so passes very much at the core, at the center of the lagoon and of the historical island. So this would be a very important action to take place, which was already being named from since 2017, not yet in place, but we hope that actually might take action, might happen eventually. You can see this was an article published in Nature in which you see basically the new the proposition of the new canal, the channel for the tourism cruises that then would arrive to Fusina, adjacent to Porto Marghera, avoiding what it does now, which is actually crossing inside this canal, so between the fish and the island of Giudecca. Why this is so important? Because again, of what I said, the third paradigm of change, which was the excavation of the canals for the port activities, but also for the tourism maritime flows. So the importance of, let's say, if possible, to a certain extent, the closure of what it's called the petroleum, Canale del Petroleum, with then the needed displacement of Porto Marghera as from inland to actually as an offshore port. So that it's one of the systemic actions that are being, and scenarios that are being discussed. And once again, even if we really look into the projections of sea level rise, it's the only possibility to keep on maintaining and sustaining port activity in Venice. Because otherwise we might actually, again, in light of sea level rise, we might need to have the Mose actually quite constantly closed, which in that sense then disrupt the possibility of maritime movement inside the lagoon. So two actions are important. movement, I'm missing the word, the displacement of Porto Marghera from inland, let's say, lagoon-based port to an offshore port in the Adriatic Sea. And the second one is the change of the canal for the tourism shipping entrance. This will support, let's say, that it will diminish the quantity of seawater entering the lagoon system. Just to sum up some of the pressures almost on a daily basis, let's say on a yearly basis on the Venice and its lagoon system, you can see the amount of tourists that Venice has on a yearly basis. It's 30 million tourism per year, in which actually 2 million they come from the cruise. So it's a very important, again, systemic change to rethink the tourism system and the maritime flows embedded in that. So to conclude, Venice, it's about maintenance, adaptability, understanding, and response as a lively, let's say, condition of inhabitation. Maintenance, it's not passive, actually it's proactive. That very much posed by Domenico Patassini, the importance of Venice having a very proactive approach to maintenance that in that sense might even change its future scenarios. The need to adapt to contingency, to, let's say, to the changing levels of the lagoon and of the sea, but also the changing conditions of sedimentation. For instance, as we saw in the constitution of the Barene, of the mud flats. But also this, let's say, the necessity to understand that Venice, it's a city of art. It's very important. It's a UNESCO heritage. It has to be protected, but at the same time, it's, let's say, seated in a highly dynamic ecosystem. So therefore, responses, the ability to respond and to be, let's say, flexible and contingent, it's extremely necessary. This is what you can see, the effect of the flood of 2019 from 1 to 110 centimeters to 180 centimeters. And you can see that basically most of the open spaces, let's say the voids in the island, what was not constructed was actually subject to flooding. So to avoid, to eventually arrive to such a dystopian future, this is a very interesting provocation. It was the outcome of a competition in 1971 by Gruppo 9999, which actually somehow, the response, so it's called the salvation of the historical center of Venice from the high tide. And the response was to replace water with green, with soil and green. So that might be a change of paradigm. Again, if any human interventions are made in the lagoon, eventually Piazza San Marco will become a swamp or will become a sea. So this is one, of course, a possible very much dystopian future. Again, as you can see in the other drawings in the competition, but another one as well, for instance, as this project of Ione Friedman, with the, let's say, an extension of his experiments on the idea of the Villa Spatiale, which was, let's say, this superimposition of aerial structure, a superstructure on top of the urban fabric of Venice, which again allowed for the maintenance of inhabitation and the maintenance of human activities in life. So with this I conclude.